Well, Andrew Coffin, thanks for dropping by today.
Good to be with you, Mark,
Well,
as always.
yeah, I was going to say that, people today know you as the vice president of a group called the Young America's Foundation, which we're thankful that you allowed us to shoot our movie on your sort of giant campus there at the Reagan Ranch. But before we get into all that, I first knew you as a movie critic for
Right.
World Magazine. So, how do you go from movie critic to running Ronald Reagan's
Hmm.
ranch home?
Well, the short answer is I didn't. I was doing both of those things at the same time. I got involved with Young America's Foundation all the way back in 1998, just after we stepped forward to save the Reagan Ranch. Um, we'll recall that President Reagan was still alive at the time, but had reached a stage with his Alzheimer's where he could no longer enjoy the property the way he once did. And so we stepped forward to protect the property when others failed to act. And really, it was at that point just with the idea that somebody had to protect what we believe is one of the most important presidential sites in the country. And then beyond that, we thought, hey, this could be a great place to serve as a campus for studying Ronald Reagan, his legacy, his ideas, what made him an effective leader. And so we opened an office out here, and my wife and I, just newly married, drove cross country from Washington, D.C., and have been here ever since. But shortly after I got here, I thought, I'd always been interested in film, studied film in college, had aspirations at one point in my life of doing a little bit of what you do, Mark.
Oh,
And I thought I
please,
want to keep
please,
my
no.
right, right. Well, I think particularly it was getting married and having to answer to my father-in-law that convinced me I needed to find productive work that would pay me something. And of course, instantly fell in love with the Reagan Ranch the first time I saw it. But I wanted to keep my hand in the film world, so I started writing for World Magazine and did that for about 5 years. And really enjoyed working with the outstanding team at World and watching plenty of terrible movies and some good movies along the way to let families know what would be suitable entertainment.
We could have used your help as a film critic to help our 17% Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
Not that I keep track of these things, but
No, it's a badge of honor, Mark.
it is.
The what
I was a little,
record breaking.
I was a little concerned that the New York Times review was a little too positive. It makes me a little bit nervous when the New York Times sort of likes the movie. But no, so really, you moved out to Santa Barbara just after you were married, and
Hmm.
I mean, I'd love to know more details. We're calling this special series the Making Reagan series of how we made the movie, but I'd love to hear more about that process of your organization acquiring the property. How did that all come about? And if you hadn't purchased it, what do you think would have happened to his home?
Oh, it highly likely would have been lost to history forever. There were attempts here in California, uh, led by people like Pete Wilson and Brooks Firestone, and attempts at the federal level to have the ranch preserved. But those efforts faltered. There was a local developer who was interested in building homes on the property, and it got some national attention at that point, and that's when our board made the gutsy decision to step in. We at the time were a fairly small North Virginia-based nonprofit with a great history, and we were founded by Bill Buckley in 1960 in his living room in Sharon, Connecticut. But had no history preserving a presidential property, didn't have a physical presence, although we were active on campuses on the West Coast, didn't have a physical presence or office on the West Coast. But what we did have was a long history working closely with Ronald Reagan to get his ideas in front of young people. He joined our advisory board shortly after we were founded, became our national chairman by the late 60s. We sponsored many of his radio addresses in the 1970s. The 80s, he had our summer conference students to the White House every year he was in office. And then he last spoke to a Young America's Foundation audience in 1993. So 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, working together to get the ideas of freedom in front of young people. And we thought, what better place to continue that relationship, continue that partnership than through his favorite place on earth, Rancho del Cielo, the Reagan Ranch. So, yeah, the ranch was at risk. One of the things that he loved about the place was he used to say, when you get there, the world is gone. And it really does feel that way. It's not the most accessible place in the world. So that was a challenge for others thinking about preserving the property. There were discussions, I think very short-sighted discussions at the time, about how much the Reagan family would benefit if the state or the federal government purchased the ranch. In some ways tragic that those in charge missed an opportunity to preserve such an important property, the Western White House for 8 years, Ronald Reagan's home for 25. On the other hand, isn't it beautiful that no tax dollars, no federal or state money went to preserving the Reagan Ranch? I think that's exactly as was meant to be, the DP, as Ronald Reagan would say, the divine plan. And then, of course, beyond that, we get to tell the Reagan story the way the Reagan story should be told. Not the way a bureaucrat in Washington wants to tell the Reagan story, not the way the National Park Service wants to tell the Reagan story, but as you have done so wonderfully in your film, the true Reagan story.
Now, did your organization purchase it directly from Mrs. Reagan?
We did, and Mike Deaver was assisting her with the sale of the property. We were fortunate that a lot of our leadership at the time and still are veterans of the Reagan administration. So people like Frank Donatelli and Ken Cribb and others who served alongside Ronald Reagan during the 8 years of the presidency were involved in negotiating on our end, and then came to really exactly the right arrangement. Nancy was gracious in terms of the sale price of the property, but more important, she transferred the ranch to us complete. So where you filmed is not a recreation. It's not an approximation of what the Reagan home may have looked like. It's Ronald Reagan's home as he enjoyed it for many, many years, down to books in the bookshelves, clothes in the closet, saddles, chainsaws, everything the way he left it when he was last there on the property.
I think the sale price was public, right? I think it was $4 million. Is that so?
Yeah, it was on the market for 6. We paid about 4.5.
I mean, even by today's standards, you got a great deal, right? Today it'd probably be quadruple that or more.
Hard to put a price on it today. Yeah, but just setting aside the historic value of the property, just the value of the land, yeah, many, many times over that price.
Right. Well, it's so interesting because you wear two hats. I mean, one, you're in charge of sort of all the Santa Barbara operations, which is the Reagan Ranch Center and the Reagan Ranch. You're also the vice president of the organization overall. Is that about right?
Yes, yeah. So I work with our president, Governor Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin, and our great executive team on the programs we run here in Santa Barbara, what we're doing at the Reagan Boyhood Home in Dixon, Illinois, and the birthplace just down the street, Tampico, our national headquarters office in Washington, D.C., or Northern Virginia, the D.C. suburbs, and then what we're doing with young people across the country on campuses. We were founded at the college level by Bill Buckley. So at that time, the focus was on getting conservative ideas in front of college audiences, particularly during the Vietnam War era. But then through the years expanded to high school programs, and over the past 25 or 30 years, that's been a huge area of growth for us. And then more recently expanded again to middle school programs. So now 6th, 7th, and 8th graders have similar opportunities to engage with ideas that are just not found in most of their classrooms, textbooks, social media, most other influences in their lives. So we're a nonprofit, meaning we're a 501c3 educational organization. We don't get involved in elections, campaigns, party politics, but we're unabashedly committed to those ideas that Ronald Reagan so well represented. Strong national defense, limited government, free enterprise, traditional values.
I want to come back to Ronald Reagan in just a moment, but whenever I see your organization, your logo, it's often on college campuses with students challenging speakers. That seems to be a real mainstay of, as you said, of your work. What is the value of that, and why do you guys do those kinds of programs on campuses?
Right. So the way our programs work is the conferences we run are naturally selective. Selective because there's a limited size for the audience, even though they've grown dramatically. Um, but selective too in terms of the students choosing to attend. If they're going to commit to 3 or 4 days in Santa Barbara or Dixon, Illinois, or Washington, D.C., or a regional program, naturally they're interested in exploring these ideas. They are interested in becoming more confident in talking about what they believe. But then we don't want them to just have a great experience here at the Reagan Ranch and go home. We want them to take those ideas back with them. So what our programs are designed to do is to inspire, activate, embolden a new generation of conservative leaders. And so we give them avenues to follow once they're excited by what they hear from Alan West or Ben Shapiro or Daniel DiMartino, great lineup of speakers we put in front of them. They can go back to their campuses and work with us to form chapters, Young Americans for Freedom chapters, work on activism projects like our 9/11 Never Forget project, or as you say, bring in conservative speakers. 90% of the time, if you hear of a conservative speaker on campus, it's students working with Young America's Foundation to make that happen. Um, Most of these schools are not inviting these speakers to campus, and so there's really almost no conservative voice, compelling conservative voice on campus unless students are working with us to make that happen. And then when you get a speaker on campus, let's say it's Ben Shapiro, who's for a long time been our most popular campus speaker. You've got the typically fairly small group of conservative students who've worked with us to make that happen. The event is important for them because it, for the first time, gives their ideas central placement in the campus debate. It gives them a chance to show leadership and develop leadership skills and abilities as they've organized the event. Then you've got the radicals who are protesting the event, who want to see it shut down, who are using every path possible to try to block the event. Sometimes that, or I should say more than sometimes, often that includes not just students, but teachers, professors, and administrators who don't want to see Ben or some other speaker on campus. But in many ways, the real audience for those campus programs is the vast majority of the students in the middle, not the students who organized it, not the radicals who don't want to hear Ben's ideas at all. It's the student who shows up just out of curiosity. Why are so many people upset that this guy is on campus? And then if they sit and listen to him for an hour or more, and Ben in particular, where you usually give maybe 20 minutes of prepared remarks, and then the real fireworks take place during the Q&A sessions. When a curious student listens to that, they may have often never heard more than a soundbite, if that, from Ben, but they get a pretty strong dose, and that's where you change hearts and minds.
So those confrontations that we see on YouTube, some of them look a little dangerous. Do you have to have security? I've seen people throw pies at speakers. What kind of threats do you receive?
Yeah, that's been consistently a factor in our programs for many years, and something we take very seriously. We've always staged our events with that in mind. The degree to which you have to bring in outside security varies based on the speaker and on the campus, and then a specific threat analysis for the event itself. Obviously, after Charlie Kirk's tragic assassination, security at every level has been stepped up. But the important thing is that our students, our speakers, have not backed down. In the wake of Charlie's murder almost exactly a year ago, we had, I think it was 35 or 36 events already scheduled to take place on campus in the weeks following, and not a single one of those canceled. But naturally, security costs escalated dramatically.
Right. So that was kind of the most extreme example. Have you had similar incidents in you guys' work?
Fortunately, I mean, nothing even remotely to that level. But we've had speakers chased out of events. We've had events shut down, often by campus security. And that's one of the tragic things and the reason that we have stepped up our legal battles in these cases significantly over the last few years. Often security is more willing to shut down an event, whisk a speaker off stage, than they are to engage with the protesters, the people who are disrupting the event. And so that amounts to a heckler's veto, and that's where we have consistently brought suit against campuses that act irresponsibly when it comes to protecting students' free speech rights.
Just seems a little baffling. Think about the 1960s, where I guess the roles were reversed in a way, where maybe more conservative administrations would try to shut down young progressive speakers, and now it seems like the roles have reversed.
Yeah, our biggest win, you could say, was filing suit against Berkeley in federal court. And you think of Berkeley as the birthplace of the free speech movement,
Right.
and yet it was the Berkeley administration that blocked two events in succession that our students were organizing on that campus. One with Ann Coulter and one with David Horowitz. And then we did finally get Ben Shapiro on that campus after filing suit. And it took 700 law enforcement officers surrounding Zellerbach Hall to make that event happen.
John Fund, who is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, maybe National Review these days. Anyway, John told me one time that President Reagan had told him way back when, maybe when he was governor, that it's very important to reach students while they're in, was it high school or college? Because once you get past that point, people's opinions are formed. Do you recall him saying something like that? And is that you guys' philosophy as well?
Yeah, I mean that is, and yeah, we've worked closely with Fund for a number of years. I think he's really correct. I mean, you don't want to give up on college students, but we've seen increasingly that it is important to reach students at younger and younger ages. Our high school programs are reaching record levels. We've got sold out audiences, typically waiting lists for just about every high school conference we run. But then it's also become clear that for many students, from the moment they enter a preschool classroom, certainly by kindergarten or first grade, they're getting indoctrinated. And so we haven't yet developed preschool or kindergarten programs, but we're headed that direction. And our new middle school programs have been running a couple years now, and obviously I'm biased, but I think they're phenomenal. We've had parents show up to these programs literally in tears because there's just nothing else like this available at that age, and they're desperate. They're looking for, even if parents themselves are trying to share ideas with their kids, they need reinforcement. They need to hear from somebody other than their parents. And so introducing middle school students, again, sixth, seventh, eighth graders, to just basic ideas, often free enterprise related, understanding how the world works, the founding principles of our country, developing critical thinking skills. You can almost see a physical transformation of these kids from the moment they arrive for a day and a half program until they leave.
Are there any progressive groups who do what you guys do?
Yeah, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford. I mean, there's no need for it. What we're up against is the billion-dollar endowments for every Ivy League school in the country, the stranglehold the teachers union has on public education. Every once in a while, some progressive group with similar goals pops up, but it's redundant.
Just to switch gears to Ronald Reagan for a bit. Obviously, you were aware of him before you took this job. You went to college. I think you went to college with a professor, Paul Kengor, who we optioned his book. He wrote a very interesting book on two books on Ronald Reagan, maybe more. But when did he first enter your awareness, and what attracted you to want to work at the ranch?
So yeah, I was four. I was born in '76, a bicentennial baby. I was four when he was elected, 12 when he left office. And so I would say he defined my sense of who and what a president was. During those formative years of my life, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. I had a family in politics, so maybe I was particularly close to that world. But I grew up in a family that certainly admired and appreciated Ronald Reagan and his leadership. As you get older, you learn pretty quickly that not every president is like Ronald Reagan. And so, in some ways, that helped develop my appreciation for him even further. I remember asking my dad if there was any way he could run again after he completed his two terms in office. And Then going to Grove City certainly was part of my philosophical development and an important part of my philosophical development. Studying in an environment, that's Grove City is known as Freedom's College. Studied in an environment unlike most college campuses that actually trains young people in certainly their faith, but also our founding principles. Paul Kengor arrived on campus midway through my time at Grove City, and quickly got to know and admire him. We became friends. He's just an outstanding teacher and professor, and I think the finest Reagan scholar working in the country today. His books, God and Reagan, Crusader, and 11 Principles of a Reagan Conservative. That is perhaps the book I recommend most often because it's a short, easy to absorb volume based on a speech Paul gave for a Young America's Foundation event, but really an excellent distillation of what it means to be a Reagan conservative. So, yeah, my time at Grove City is a big part of what led me in this direction. And then, seeing where my friends went to school, their experience at campuses other than Grove City, again, the contrast gives you an appreciation for the sort of education that I was fortunate enough to receive on that campus. And so both admiration for Ronald Reagan and the idea that I could be a part of exposing more young people on more campuses to these ideas through the work of Young America's Foundation is what led me here. The I'll leave it there.
Well, I met with, I think about 55 people that knew Reagan, worked with him, but you may be one of the few people that I've met with even more than I've met with because of your circumstances and all the people that come to the ranch. So you've probably met with hundreds compared to my 55. But what stands out? What surprised you? I'm sure you've collected a lot of stories about him over the years. Was there anything that stands out or surprised you from all those people you spoke with?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I always come back to is you know the longtime co-chairman of our board of governors were Ed Meese and Bill Clark. Dick Allen referred to the Reaganauts, the true Reaganites, who were most fully in sync with his agenda, and certainly Meese and Clark are near the top of that list. We were incredibly fortunate to have leadership like theirs. Mike Reagan and his family became great friends. Mike, sadly, we lost earlier this year. Down the line, others from the Reagan administration that I've been fortunate enough to get to know and work with. But what really stands out to me is talking with Secret Service agents, military aides, Navy Seabees, White House Communications Agency personnel, all of these people who were surrounding Ronald Reagan in his most unguarded moments. And what you learn is that there was no facade. With Ronald Reagan, what you saw was what you got. In some ways, I'm more impressed, although, again, incredible privilege to work with somebody like Ed Meese, and his perspective on Ronald Reagan is invaluable. But in some ways, it's been more striking to me to hear from people who saw Ronald Reagan in his most unguarded moments. And there's no skeletons in the closet. There's no facade. There's no hidden persona that failed to match up to the public image. He wasn't perfect. Everyone is complicated. He was human, but he was remarkably consistent throughout his life. And to live in the public eye for as long as he did as a radio announcer, movie star, TV star, uh, governor of California, president of the United States, and to have the stories surrounding him be so consistent is I can't think of another public figure that you describe in quite the same way. So there are you get into lots of pretty amazing individual stories, but that's the overall thing that really stands out to me.
That's interesting. So you're sort of talking about the people that he didn't have to try to impress, the people that are around him that he could have been a jerk to.
Right.
Those were people that you learned the most about him from.
Yeah, in some ways, or at least has left the biggest impression on me because their stories could be very different. They had a unique vantage point. I mean, he was surrounded with personnel 24 hours a day.
Right. Yeah. I always think of that Peggy Noonan. I think it was Peggy Noonan in one of her books. She finally found a clerk. Do you recall the story at a hotel that Reagan had been rude to upon checking into the hotel? And she was like, great, I finally found, some dirt on him that he was rude to a hotel clerk. And then the clerk said, yeah, but he came down the next morning and apologized to me for the night before. So I was like, oh, shoot. I can't even fight him being consistently rude to somebody. But, yeah, I mean, what do you think it is about him that people like you devote your life to getting his ideas out? The fact that 70 years, 50 years later, you're still talking about him. People are still talking about him. What's the meaning of all that, do you think?
I think number one, he was a uniquely effective leader and president. And if you look back through our history, we've had some decent presidents, we've had some mediocre presidents, we've had some bad presidents. We've had relatively few truly great presidents. And I think Ronald Reagan, you put up among the top three or four in our nation's history. So I think his role in ending the Cold War and restoring pride in America, his economic stimulus packages, leading to decades of unrivaled peacetime growth, all of that stands out. But I don't think it fully explains why we still study him today. And I think that goes back to his ability as a communicator and how well-founded he was in the ideas he was communicating. He used to say, particularly towards the end of the presidency, that he wasn't sure he was comfortable being called a great communicator because he said it wasn't him being the great communicator, it was communicating great ideas. And I think, ultimately both are true. He was a uniquely effective communicator, but he had an incredible ability to, he was rarely talking about himself. And even when he's talking about current issues or policy debates, he's always going back to principles, ideas, and values. And, the work of Milton Friedman or Russell Kirk or Bill Buckley or Frank Meyer or Hayek, down the line of the formative thinkers of the modern, Russell Kirk, formative thinkers of the modern conservative movement. And so that is, I think, a big part of what makes his appeal, his value to us somewhat timeless. You could sit down here at the Reagan Ranch Center, and this is our museum and conference center down in the heart of Santa Barbara below the ranch. And we've got all these great interactive exhibits, his radio addresses, key speeches, and you could sit down and listen to any one of those weekly radio broadcasts. And maybe a third of it, you might be a little bit confused about the particular issue or circumstance he's talking about. Most of it, it sounds like he's talking about exactly the challenges our country faces today. And so I think his ability to talk about principles, ideas, and values, and then do it in such a kind of plain spoken way that connected to the American people, that made people think, yes, that's who we are as a country. That's who I want our country to be. That made him a uniquely effective leader, and I think uniquely applicable to helping to inspire young people with these same ideas.
Now, you mentioned Charlie Kirk earlier, and he has an organization, or has an organization called Turning Point. Do you look at them as a competing organization? Do you guys work together? What's your view of what they do in vis-a-vis what you guys do?
Yeah, I kind of go back to what your question about similar organizations on the left. We look at our competition as the professors, teachers, administrators on in high schools and on college and university campuses across the country. No other organization. There are about 20 million college students in this country. We're certainly not reaching all of them. We need more people doing more of this work, not fewer. We don't have any official relationship with TPUSA, but there's certainly plenty of overlap in students and speakers. And we've got partnerships that we've developed through the years with other like-minded organizations, everybody from the Heritage Foundation to Hillsdale and Grove City to Foundation for Economic Education, ISI, a number of other groups that we've worked with to varying degrees. And our perspective is a rising tide lifts all boats. We need more young people exposed to more conservative ideas because it's certainly not happening with almost any other influence in their lives.
Because I was making this movie on Ronald Reagan, I've had a chance to sort of get to know some of you folks who are leading that movement. And I watched a generational change as some of the older folks would retire and people more of your age would come in. I definitely noticed a more collaborative sense among the younger leaders than the older ones. I could be just making this up, or imagining this, but I don't think so. I felt like the older generation, let's just say the 75 plus crowd, were very competitive, and the 50 something crowd of next generation leadership were much more, even though they were different organizations, much more collaborative and not necessarily competing. Would that be an accurate sense, do you think? Do you notice that?
There may be something there.
The reason I ask is I wonder if you just quoted Ronald Reagan about a rising tide. I wonder if that's a sense that Reagan gave the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, that could be. I think maybe there's a natural progression there, as the conservative movement really didn't exist in its current form until the say 70s, 80s. Kind of emerged out of that Buckley Young Americans for Freedom era, Goldwater, and so forth. And so you've got a bunch of groups who develop around that kind of have to establish themselves, create an identity, a fundraising pipeline, and so forth. So maybe there's a natural progression there. I certainly do think that, you look at the leadership of most movement organizations today, it is a Reagan generation and very much defined by Ronald Reagan and his perspective. In our case, I think you give enormous credit to Scott Walker. Governor Walker is somebody I would absolutely describe as a movement builder. He's very collaborative in mindset. He's got a great vision for the growth of Young America's Foundation, but also the movement at large. And it's, the governor who's pushed us into new areas, the middle school programs, higher quality programs, larger programs, and new partnerships and collaborations.
I mean, as somebody who operates in the conservative world, it's got to be jarring for you to see a lot of your brethren and sisters attacking each other, especially in the last year since Charlie Kirk's death. What's your overall take on what you see happening, especially in the podcast universe, the commentary universe, and just the divisions of people breaking Reagan's 11th commandment?
Yeah, let's pivot back to talking about the movie, Mark. These are thorny issues. I think there certainly is a battle for the soul of the conservative movement. I think there are lots you could say about this. I think one thing I would say is maybe make two distinctions. One is a lot of that exists in an online world that is somewhat divorced from the real world. And so you get all these X battles, and that doesn't necessarily filter down to what average Americans or average young people care about. And the other thing I'd say is there are a number of people who are exposing themselves that I really, maybe they've been identified with, associated with the conservative movement. They're not part of the conservative movement. And I think it's important for us to continue to make the case for what it means to be a conservative, for those Reagan-esque values that I think are enduring, that go beyond any one election cycle or any one Twitter battle. And we've seen consistently young people respond incredibly well once they are exposed to those ideas. And we had 800 college students with us last week for our DC summer high school or college conference at the JW Marriott. We had about 1,200 for a big Freedom 250 rally as part of that program at Mount Vernon. And that is in sync with every major program we've run this year has doubled in capacity from the year prior. So I think there's clearly enormous demand for programs like this. Young people are hungry for meaning and purpose. They get a taste of these ideas. One Reagan quote that we come back to time and again, it's actually from his Tear Down This Wall speech, is there's a flickering spark in all of us, which has struck at just the right age, will light up the rest of our lives. And so it is our goal to get in front of young people at those crucial formative ages and make sure we light that spark.
Well, as you said, we did film on the ranch, and it was a great honor to film on the ranch, also on Air Force One. I think also that last scene as he rides off into the sunset, to be actually sort of in the neighborhood of where he would have ridden. I don't know if he rode quite that ridge, but in that area, that was pretty remarkable. What was it like to have hundreds and hundreds of people descending on your quiet little
Right.
cave there?
Yeah, as you know, we've had some productions up there, news, documentary productions, but nothing like what you did. It's the only narrative film, the only feature film to shoot at the ranch itself, and that's I suspect a record that will be intact for a fairly long time. Not because you all abuse the property, but just because we're very picky about what sort of production we'd work with. Yeah, that was quite a production. The booms, cranes, drones the size of helicopters, and hundreds of costume, makeup, lighting, sound, production folks on set to make that a reality. Of course, your team was great to work with, and I think you captured some just phenomenal footage. The scenery itself was breathtaking, and that sunset and that last ride scene, I'm sure you did some color correction, but that's not a CGI sunset. That was, as we saw it, that was one of the more spectacular sunsets I've ever seen at the ranch on that ridge, as John Barleta and Ronald Reagan were riding along, and then he breaks away off into the sunset. An amazing scene. It was, there were a few moments while you were filming up there where I almost just had to pinch myself. I remember standing on the bank of Lake Lucky, and Penelope Ann Miller and Dennis Quaid rowing the canoe True Love across the lake. And as he, reproposed to her on their 25th wedding anniversary, and then they're discussing his run for office. I was standing there thinking, I've told this story to guests, to students for decades now, and all of a sudden it's coming to life in front of my eyes. It was a pretty amazing moment.
Yeah, it really was. You had a great team. I think in particular you have a great guy. I don't know exactly what his title is, but Brent.
Yes.
Does great work. I think he's been with you for many, many years. But I always wanted to make sure we didn't upset Brent, because Brent's job was to make sure that nobody screwed up anything or messed up anything permanently. And so I always kept an eye on Brent. Is Brent okay? That was my barometer.
Yes, that is a good barometer, and that's exactly right. Yeah, Brent Kilper is our associate director, and this fall will have been with us 20 years, and he's responsible for the physical plant here at the center and up at the ranch. And so, yes,
The other thing that was remarkable that you guys allowed us to do, and I want to tell the audience too, I've said this before, but there was nobody in Andrew's group or the Reagan Library, the Reagan family, nobody had veto power or said, we don't want you to say this, we want him to look good. We had none of that, of course, and you guys were all gracious to respect those boundaries because we did want the viewer to feel like it was an honest take and we weren't trying to carry water for any particular group.
Right.
But you guys were kind enough to let us meet with John Barleta, who was very closely associated with you guys. And Dennis met with him and I met with him, and he told the story of that after the last horse ride. And that was really remarkable. But talk a bit about John. He wrote a book called Riding with Reagan. And his character was kind of a key character in the ending of our movie especially.
Yeah, John is really the defining voice in the story we tell at the ranch. And very early on, Nancy was gracious in returning to the property a few times after it was sold. She brought some personal items that they'd removed to their Bel Air home and brought them back to the ranch, made sure everything looked exactly as it should. And then as we got to know the property better, as the project was taking shape, we would send questions down to Nancy, and pretty consistently we were getting the answer, well, I'm not quite sure, you're going to need to ask John that. Why don't you check with John? And so, of course, okay, who is John? How do we get a hold of him? And so she connected us to John Barleta, who was an agent on the PPD, so back at the White House with the president, but the agent, after some difficulties in his first trips to the ranch, the agent who was assigned to manage the riding detail. And because of that, again, John was not just at the ranch. He was all over the world with the president. But because basically if the president even thought about a horse, John was at his side. The two of them formed a very unique, very close relationship. And one that extended for 17 years, well, actually beyond 17 years, but 17 years officially. John was on the Reagan detail from 1980 until he retired from the Secret Service in 1997. Very unusual career for a Secret Service agent, one that will probably never be repeated, but a testament to just how close the two of them had become. John was one of the few people who continued to visit the president down in the Bel Air home up through his final days. So John's voice, his stories are kind of at the heart of what we share at the ranch, as people come to really meet the man when they visit Rancho del Cielo. You mentioned his book, Riding with Reagan. John always said there's no politics in this book. It's just about Reagan, the man. And it's his simple but moving and profound stories about what he observed spending so much time with Ronald Reagan over that 17-year period. So I'm glad John ended up in a prominent role in the film. Trevor Donovan, I think the actor who played him, John passed away sadly before you completed production, although he was up at the ranch with Dennis during his first visit. John would have been very happy with the good-looking young actor who played him in the film, but you really did capture some important elements of John's story in the movie as well.
Yeah, and the audience should know that there really was no last horse ride after he confronted the president. But, we were not making a documentary, so we could take a little bit of liberty with that, and we moved that ride, which probably happened the day before, to the next day. But
yeah, you and I talked about that a little bit, but I completely get the last ride, the ride off into the sunset. So yeah, all you did was reverse the order, and it works beautifully for the film.
I had for some reason I had people trying to talk me out of that, and I said nope, it has to end with that scene. And I don't think people know this, but the actual voiceover in the movie where Dennis says that is the most low-tech voiceover ever. He texted me that, but it was so good that I didn't want to change it. We didn't want to go back in the studio and do it properly. So that's actually a voice memo, iPhone text from Dennis that became that voiceover. But so well done. But it was so great. I think you all arranged for John Barleta's sister to speak to Trevor,
right,
the day before he began shooting. And Trevor tells the story in a really good way. But she said, "You're going to do a Boston accent, right?" Poor Trevor says, "Yes, ma'am." And 12 hours or 24 hours learning a Boston accent at the request of John's sister.
he pulled it off. But yes, I was standing right next to Trevor as he was talking to Barbara, and heard that exchange, and I saw the look on his face. But yeah, he absorbed it and did would have done John proud.
So really, John would be one of the people you were talking about, the quote unquote little people that probably tell us the most about who we are is the way we treat the little people around us. Would he be one of those?
He would be, but in some ways, again, John had a very unique and very close relationship. The surprising thing to me is that, I've now spoken to, or we've done oral histories with dozens and dozens of agents, many of whom were just there for a period of time, not the extensive career with Reagan that John had. And that's where it's surprising that, the military aides were some of the few people who actually slept on the property. Agents worked in 8-hour shifts when they were off duty, they were off the property. There was a little bunk for both the president's doctor and the military carrying the football on the ranch. And we've done reunions with military aides who served with Ronald Reagan over the 8 years of the presidency. Again, just the consistency of their stories. Is what is remarkable to me. And we still benefit from that, both in terms of just their affection and goodwill towards the president and anything connected to his legacy, willingness to be a part of events or share their stories with us and artifacts to us. But even in more material ways, I'll quickly tell you a story of there's a gentleman, this is not Secret Service related, but a gentleman who owned a big waste management portable restroom company down in LA, and we needed to improve our facilities at the ranch. And so, through a mutual friend, invited him to come up and see the Reagan Ranch and talk about what he can provide for us as we do our student events up there. And we're actually sitting on the front patio and right in front of the home. And he says, "This is not my first time here." And I was shocked. I thought, "Oh, I was sharing the ranch visit with experience with him for the first time." He said, "No, in the 1970s, I think it was 76, Ronald Reagan was having a party up at the ranch, and he needed some portable restrooms. And so his company was much smaller at the time, and he decided to make the delivery himself. He and his wife driving a flatbed up that winding canyon road to the ranch entrance, and he's led on the property, drives down to the house to unload the bathrooms, and here this guy in jeans and white t-shirt comes walking up to the truck, offering to help him out. And of course, it's the former Governor Reagan. And so they unload everything together, get it all set up, and then Governor Reagan invites him to sit on the patio right where we were at that moment, he and his wife, for a glass of lemonade. And he's, he kind of tearing up as he's telling the story, because he had no expectation that he would be treated in that way. He thought he was just delivering some porta johns. And then, this so many years later, we're talking about these deluxe restroom trailers that would work well up at the ranch due to the unique nature of our programs up there. And he says to me, "You know what? You're going to have one. You're going to have it by next week." He said, "Completely at my cost." He said, "There's no better way I can say thank you to Ronald Reagan for the way he treated me that day than to give you one of these." And it just, it's one small story. It's one moment in time. It was very meaningful to us at that moment. But it's those sorts of things that are striking. That Ronald Reagan would have had no way to anticipate the decades later the impact of that small act of kindness. But that's just the way he treated the people around him, whether it was Queen Elizabeth or an enlisted CB working on the trails at the ranch.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of the guys that I think you know him as well that we spoke to was Dana Rohrabacher, future congressman, who was a speechwriter. And Dana said one time the president told me, because our views are perceived as being so harsh, we have to go out of our way to be gracious with people. And I think you saw that a lot. And he probably got it from his mother. His mother was always helping people in prisons and doing all kinds of things. But he did seem to go out of his way to be kind to the little people, quote unquote, who are not really little, of course, but the world thinks of them that way. Well, I want to pivot as we sort of wind things down to the future, and we've partnered with you guys in bringing our sets from the movie to Dixon, and
Right.
I'd love for people to hear kind of what you guys' plans are, not only for our sets, but just overall and all the things you're doing in Reagan's hometown.
Yeah, so this is another exciting project for us. A few years ago, we began talking with the wonderful folks in Dixon who ran the small community foundation that preserved the Reagan Boyhood Home there in the heart of Ronald Reagan's hometown. And that project had kind of run its course. They'd done a great job protecting, preserving the home, sharing it for many years. They'd done a full restoration going back to the early 1980s, but we're struggling to keep the project afloat. And so we thought, basically there's two options here. The home is lost, the project just folds, or there had been some discussion about turning it over to the Park Service, and we didn't think the Park Service was going to do the sort of job that should be done in telling the Reagan story there in Dixon. And so we thought, okay, we can create a third option, and that's that we step forward to protect another key Reagan site. And so we did that. Shortly thereafter. We were approached by the family that was preserving his birthplace in Tampico, and so we absorbed that project as well. Both key Reagan sites that are really remarkably significant in understanding the development of his character. Some of the things we were just talking about, his mother's influence, the development of his faith, some things you captured really nicely in the film, even his early appreciation for the evils of communism. And so that's important, but we also think about that spot as a beachhead for our growing programs in the heartland in the Midwest. So now we've got the national headquarters in Virginia, the ranch out here on the West Coast, and then what we're doing in Dixon there in Illinois as we grow our middle school, high school, and college programs in the middle of the country. And so we have now acquired the entire block surrounding the Boyhood Home, both as a protective preservation measure. It wouldn't be ideal to have a gas station or a McDonald's on the corner opposite the Boyhood Home, but it also has given us a campus, a blank slate to create something that will be a magnet for young people throughout the Midwest and across the country. And so we are still in the developmental phase of these plans, but we're developing plans to create classrooms and auditorium and museum to better tell the Reagan story there in Dixon, and to be a home for our student programs. And one of the outstanding centerpieces of our plans for the exhibit are the sets from your film that working with you, we were able to acquire and bring to Dixon. They're currently in storage, but we will be utilizing them actually in a few different avenues at our sites across the country. But the outstanding detailed life-size replica, almost looks like you're sitting there today, of the Oval Office will be a centerpiece of our exhibit galleries there in Dixon, and really beautifully bookend the Reagan story, because really the story there in Dixon is from that house, that simple home there, not too far from the banks of the Rock River, to the White House. So from that house to the White House. And so to give young people the opportunity to study what from his earliest days made Ronald Reagan a great leader, and then understand what he accomplished as president as they actually walk into this life-size physical recreation of the Oval Office. So we're pretty excited about the way those plans are developing.
So you'll have conferences there as well?
Yeah, we're already running programs there. We just did a high school conference in Dixon in July, did another Freedom at 250 block party, a big rally with Rachel Campos Duffy from Fox, and her husband, Secretary of the Interior Sean Duffy, made a surprise appearance. Alan West, Governor Walker, Bert Folsom, some live music from Jet Juergensmeyer. So great program. We had nearly 500 people on the block for that. So we're already using it as a campus. We've got some great partnerships with local sites, the Northwest Territory Historic Center, the old Post House Ballroom. But ultimately, our programs will benefit from having some of our own facilities to house the student programs, and as I say, better tell the Reagan story, connecting the dots of his life and development there in Dixon.
Well, we talked to different folks about the possibility of bringing our sets to them, but you guys, it just seems to me you have the pattern now of really seizing those moments when others maybe don't quite step up, as with the ranch. And so we're thankful that those can live on, and hopefully young people and others can see those sets. It's funny because with AI doing what it's doing now, we probably wouldn't have built a lot of those sets the way we did today. Today, you probably just flick a switch and there's your Oval Office and there's the Washington Hilton backdrop, whereas we actually, crazy enough, built those, had our team build those out. And so I think it's going to change. Movie making is definitely going to change. So this might have been the last physical set, or toward the end of physical sets, because there's so much progress is being made. Progress, if it's progress or regress. But in any event, we're thankful that you guys have them there, and we'll be able to see them for many years to come. Andrew, it's been great to have you and to learn more about your organization, what you guys do, and kind of what your role is here as well. And a lot of people, I'm sure, in your universe are thankful that you stayed out of filmmaking and went into what you did to help preserve these things. So good to visit with you today.
Yeah, always great talking to you, Mark. And we remain appreciative for all that you've accomplished through this film, and it'll be exciting to see it back in theaters.
Thanks, Andrew.
Good to talk to you, Mark.